Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi Corner. This is episode number 212, The $6 Million Man, the classic 1974 series starring Lee Majors and Richard Anderson. Now, tonight is a very special episode. We are actually broadcasting on a Saturday, which we rarely ever do. And I am really happy to welcome tonight to the show as my very special guest co-host. He is my grade school friend going back. I have not seen and I hadn't spoken to him up until a couple of days ago in 47 years. And I just want to introduce him. And again, it's my friend, Mr. Jack Bello.
Hi,
Jack,
Roy. Hey, thanks, Roy. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm really impressed. 200 and how many episodes now?
212.
Wow, that's tremendous. And I gotta say, I have a little bit of stage fright because of the amount of shows that you've done. I feel like I need to live up to your expectations of what a guest should be. But yeah, it's been a long time. It's been 47 years. Maybe I think it's a little longer than that, Roy, because I think when you moved from our town, we were probably around 8 or 9 years old. So, you know, it's a little bit longer, I think.
Yeah, believe it or not, it was November of 1976 that my folks, we moved from Wallington, New Jersey to Lopakong, New Jersey. So it's kind of crazy that, yeah, no, believe it or not, you know, I'm giving our ages away too, Jack. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So I'm excited to talk about your topic today, and I was looking at the credits, and I remember vividly, even though this sounds kind of crazy because it's well over 40-something years. I remember you and I walking home from school sometimes and talking about some of the experiences we had with different different TV shows, and back then, again, there was no internet, so that just to level set with people that may be a lot younger than us that could be watching this, no internet, and we're using rabbit ears to tune in to the most current show. And I remember being really captivated by this one pilot of a new show called The $6 Million Man, and I was really blown away by it because of the intro and just how captivating the whole intro was, and and essentially what happened to the test pilot. So but again, looking forward to having this discussion today.
No, I very much am too. In fact, we had covered this show a couple of years ago, and we had discussed the pilot on the show, but with the 50th anniversary coming, coming here to be now with 1973 in regards to the very first movie, I was thinking I really wanted to revisit this, and I had the distinct memory of you introducing me to this show. And it was actually, for me, it was after I had missed the very first movie, and then they did 2 subsequent movies after that. So when I actually first started watching The $6 Million Man, it already had been into series from my childhood recollections anyway. And so that would almost like put it into 1974. And one of the things that you were discussing with me before, when we were off the air, is that the premiere of the first movie actually took place, on your birthday, which I thought was really
I actually, I was preparing for the show because I wanted to at least have some sort of organization in whatever direction this conversation goes. And I never really recognized this, but the first movie pilot was called The Moon and the Desert, and it was directed by Richard Irving and written by Martin Cadine and Henry Simon. And the original air date was March 7th, 1973, which I was stunned because this was, again, I was really captivated by this series and still love it today. And there's, when you really dig into like just the overall topics of what was shared, not just in the pilot, but in many of these episodes. Man, it's uncanny with how closely these topics touch on today's issues.
Oh my
So
God, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely. It really is, and it's like we're fast forwarding 50 years ahead, and here we are. A lot of the things that were being discussed, we are actually living and experiencing today, which we'll definitely get into as we progress. I just want to welcome a few of our viewers that are out there. So Randy Lee is joining us from Wisconsin. Randy, welcome. And he's commenting. He's saying 6 million isn't anything today.
no way. It's probably 6 billion if they could make a bionic person.
Exactly. Jeff Rubel is joining us from out west from Utah. Welcome, Jeff. And he's saying, welcome to Sci-Fi Disco. Lou is joining us from Rhode Island. Lou, welcome to the show. Good to see you out there. And May is also joining us. Welcome, May. Great to see you as always. Great to see everybody as always. And Randy's saying I was popular because I had multiple $6 million man action figures. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that too a little bit later too, Randy. Kenner really actually did very well with that in regards to the market and everything. Jack, before we go on, I just want to say thank you for your compliments before too. In regards to the show and everything, and I really just enjoy being able to converse with you like this, and it just brings back a lot of childhood memories. So no fears in regards to that, and yeah. I hope I kind of live up to your standards in regards to the show as well too. So just so you know, it's definitely reciprocated, and it's much appreciated that you're a part of the show. So thank you.
No problem. And I just want to apologize to some of the people that were waiting. Crazy enough, it's like if the brand new laptop doesn't recognize the soundboard or a video card. So I'm literally using my cell phone. That was the last resort. So first, thanks for hanging in there, everybody.
And that's, yeah, we appreciate it. And hey, you know what? Even the Bionics had malfunctions right on the show. So there we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to say hi to Shari. Shari's joining us. Hi, hun. She's downstairs tuning in. And also Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Deborah's joining us from Phillipsburg as well. Welcome, Deborah. Thanks for being out there too. So in regards, I want to ask you, did you read the novelization by any chance? And that was by Martin Caden that you had mentioned before too. Cyborg.
It's funny. I did not. I have not read the novel. I'm not much of a reader. I'm more of an audio tape guy, or more just on the overall visual watching movies. So that's just the way I've always been. But it is. I'm gonna start looking into it and maybe see if I can get the audio tape of it and just take a look at it. But I did do some research on the novel, and I have some notes here on it. I believe it was a 1972 novel that it was released in 1972, and it really it's, from what I can see, the plot summary and everything that's outlining Steve Austin as a test pilot. It closely. I think they did a very good job. As I look at some of the some of this at the summary, it appears as though they really got it right. Based on what I can see with with the captions of what this novel's all about.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you too, Jack. I actually did not read the novelization. I've always wanted to, and it's just I never got around to doing that. From my research, I had read that the movie, at least the first movie that was introduced to the viewers, was very close to the novelization. When they did the second two movies, they were actually produced by Glenn A. Larson, who was a very prolific television producer. And he really had the character of Steve Austin being more James Bond-like with those two movies. And then when it went to series in 1974, they kind of shifted back where he was a test pilot, and it was more of a less than like a spy show. More, again, he was an astronaut and everything that had happened to him. One of the things I want to do is I just want to welcome a few more people that are jumping on. I see Jeff Curley's joining us from Texas. Jeff, welcome. And Jeff, happy belated birthday. Jeff just celebrated a birthday. And Sean Dempsey is joining us from Colorado. He's saying Mark Wahlberg was going to make a movie which was going to be the $6 billion man.
Interesting. And that would definitely be 6 billion today. No question.
And we have a childhood friend also on watching us, and it's Lisa Polaro, Sensevere. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Good to see you out there.
Just for everybody's understanding that's out there, Lisa, Roy, and myself were all in the same classroom back in the 70s at, what was that, Roy? Gavalak School at the time? Yeah.
Yep.
And then before then, it was Lincoln, I think. Lincoln something.
Yeah, the Lincoln School, the old Lincoln School. We were only there for kindergarten. It's funny. I was going to take a screenshot and put the school, our grade school, on there, and I was looking at it, and pretty much looked the same. It's just that there was some almost like blue shutters that were around some of the windows, which I didn't recall. I remember it really just being a brown building, or a brick building with, no type of blue type of paint or siding at all.
Sure.
But and I also see, I think Charlene's out there. Charlene, welcome. She's saying the novelization is a very good book. Welcome, Charlene. Thanks for joining tonight. Great to see you out there. And Dan Rodriguez is joining us from Pennsylvania, and he said, not based on Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yeah, the wrestler. No. Good stuff. Yeah, so now, Jack, do you recall having watched the first movie?
I recall. Yes, I do. The first movie, really was focused on Steve Austin, the character, doing several moon landings, and then there was an issue, right, with his reentry vehicle. And, and then that turned into, basically an amputation, which was pretty catastrophic. And I thought the whole concept was interesting. And back in the day, what really got me more interested, and this is for some of the older, I guess we're all kind of old on this show today, but Reader's Digest always had articles on advanced plastic surgery or on body modifications and what the future holds. And I just remember coming across plenty of articles on that. And so with that interest, and then, again, looking at what the concept was of this first pilot, it really had me captivated, because he lost both legs, he lost an arm, and he lost sight in one eye. And so it was just really interesting. And even though if you even today, like if you looked at the special effects, I guess, where, in regards to the prosthetic limbs that they worked on, the limbs, although, again, with the special effects that they have today, I think they did a really great job. If you really examine, the special effects and what they did and how they showed the operation, and then just all the intricate circuitry and the mechanics of the arms and the legs, I thought it was pretty tremendous. And for me at the time, being captivated by that, because it in my eyes, it wasn't cheesy. Right. And I wasn't able to poke holes in it by looking at this as being a waste of time. It really captivated me. But what more so, what really captivated me even more was Lee Majors taking on, him in that role, and just his overall presence, and how he commanded the role, and how it was just so natural, was another. It was very comfortable to watch the show, and you always at least I always looked forward to these episodes.
Yeah, he definitely was a natural for it. And it's interesting too, because when you watch the first episode, the way he plays the character before the accident, and again, this is pretty much what happens too with a show, as the character is written and there's progression, the character will evolve, and and it'll go in a different direction, so to speak. But he was very, it was almost like I don't want to say an arrogance, but I mean, he, there sort of was, but not, it wasn't tremendous. But what happens is I mean, when that accident happens to him and it's horrific, and there's the whole underlying thing that about bionics, how in future episodes and even in the reunion movies, how it's something that's really cool. But at the core of it, what you just said, I mean, he's lost an arm, he's lost his legs, and he's lost an eye. So pretty much he wants to die. And he really plays that true to heart. And he's very convincing. And as everything evolves and he's introduced to the bionics, Dr. Rudy Wells in this case, in this movie, is not Alan Oppenheimer, who would later be Rudy Wells. And then later on, even after that, Martin E. Brooks came on, I believe, in the 3rd season, and then also worked on The Bionic Woman. Martin Balsam brings a humanity to the role as well. And he's friends with Steve Austin. He knows Steve Austin. He knows the type of individual he is. He knows the passion he has for life and everything. And again, he has gone to the moon. He's done a lot of different things. And he really sympathizes with him in regards to everything that he's been through. And even the role of Oscar Goldman is not in this. It's a character that's played by Darren McGavin, who played Spencer. And he's pretty much almost like a tyrant. Essentially, he just wants Steve Austin to be this weapon. And that's what he wants to turn him into. And it's almost like he's indispensable, but he just wants to use him. But to your point again, the way Lee Majors portrays the character, even in that first movie, and then as his character evolves after those 2 subsequent movies, and then into the series, you really just have this, there's almost like a warmth and a compassion that you have for him. And he's just such a good guy. He's a great role model in regards to that character.
And absolutely, and I think you hit it on the head. And they humanized it, the writing, the directing. It really played on the characters and how they interacted in a real life situation versus taking a whole different direction, right? That they could have with the series. And I thought it worked. I believe it was introduced well before its time. I believe it lasted for 5 seasons total. But when you start to examine, and we were talking about this earlier because I had mentioned to you when I was looking at this one episode that we're going to discuss, I said there's really a flavor of ethics here that we're dealing with today. And ethics, and we'll dig into this, for those of you that are wondering where we're going with this. We're going to be discussing a particular series, but the things, and I took some notes here, the things that I've kind of analyzed was there are ethics. Now think about this. I just want everyone out there to imagine this. Imagine having a catastrophic accident, and then the ability to have your legs replaced, your arm replaced, your eye replaced. No one knows that any of these parts are replaced. What do you think is there any ethical responsibility for you as an individual who's received all of these, wonderful, I'll call it upgrades, to your extremities? What are the ethics that are surrounded by that? And in this one particular episode, I was like, wow, there was so many different ethical things, like sports, as an example. We'll talk about that a little later. Like cloning, right? Have you heard the term deep fake, right? There are deep fakes and video, but this is in video, right? This is audio visual related interactivity. But when you think about it, if there was the ability to create an android or an absolute duplicate of yourself, they can, some people can argue and say that they've kind of perfected that to a way where they can dive in, or they can modify somebody's features so that you could have what appears to be a clone of another person, right? So there's ethics with that, and how do you use that? And then this series also touches on, or this particular episode that we'll talk about touches on how they're trying to protect circuitry and guidance missile related intelligence from getting into the wrong hands with an evil character. And so when you think about robotics, bionics, think about AI, right? We're all talking about AI today, and there's a lot out there on that. And if you mix AI now with robotics and androids, and where does the decision making start and where does it end? And then if you think about it, when we look at AI and when we look at bionics or Android, again, think about Terminator, right? At one point, Skynet becomes self-aware. So there's all kinds of things that were happening in this series. And that's why I said maybe it was a little bit before its time.
No, definitely. Those are excellent points, and we definitely have to discuss them, because really we are living that now, not to the full extent, but we're starting to grow into that gray area. And as more and more time goes on, we're gonna get deeper and deeper into it. And really, I can't say it's almost like there is not a day that goes by now that me personally, I do not hear about AI. It's whether it's in conversation with family, friends, you hear it on the news. It seems to be a recurring topic. I just want to welcome, I see that Jack Daly just joined. Jack, welcome. He's saying, I am Roger Corby, and he's referencing from the Star Trek Classic episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of, which was Christine Chappell's fiance, who actually turned out to be a robot. And that's a great example of that, Jack. Randy asked, how was he powered? Steve Austin was powered. It was nuclear power cells. That's right. How he was powered. And
Brandy, they kind of and there was one particular episode in the series where a bad character was trying to dissect Steve, and then he warned them not to do that because it would kill everybody in the room. So there was a tremendous, his body or his limbs are encased in a I guess what they would say is like a very strong alloy, that would protect everybody from high doses of radiation. But right. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, and there was a lot of thought that went into the character and also the different processes, especially as the character evolved and they got deeper into the series with that. Dan is saying, I remember really liking when there were accidents to the skin and they'd show the bionics with all the mechanics and electronics, which is exactly what we're discussing right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charlene said that she really liked Dr. Rudy Wells. And also, let's see, Randy said, true story, I worked for a company called OSI. Unfortunately, we did not have bionics. But oops, and let me see. Oh, and Dan said, I kind of remember when they brought in the Bionic Woman, they touched more on the emotional effects to her with the bionics. Yeah, and just to touch upon that, Dan, I mean, that was essentially going to be a two-part story. It was a love story with Steve Austin and Jamie Summers. And what happened was they killed her off. And there was so much fan mail that came in, and there was so much response from her character that they had to bring her back. And interesting enough, if I remember correctly, Lindsay Wagner, she was a contract player at Universal, and her contract essentially was over, and it was done. So they wanted her back. So they, she was in a spot where she really could ask for what she wanted, through her agent. So it was one of those situations that really, really worked very well. And when the studios want you, you know what? There you go. So that was just an excellent an example of that. So the episode we are going to be focusing on today is Day of the Robot. And this episode actually aired in February of 1984, February of 1974.
74, so,
yeah. Yeah, we would have been about actually 8 years old, just about when this, actually no, 7 years old when this episode aired. So
Yeah. Yeah. This was 74. It was, yeah, just before our birthday. Our
yeah.
birthdays, I should say. Yep.
So this episode is very unique because it actually is the first time they're dealing with robotics or having Steve Austin go up against somebody that actually has physical strength to his level. And I thought it would be kind of interesting, also fun, because I had a lot of memories of this episode seeing this. I can't say that I recall seeing it back in, our Wallington days, but I can say I definitely remember seeing this in the 1970s. And it probably was because the reruns actually at that time, I mean, once the show ended, then it was, on to the next season. And this show actually did not come out until several years later. So I actually may have seen this actually in its first run, because as I was saying earlier, I didn't see the first few movies or the very first episodes. And again, recall that we had talked about it, that you really enjoyed the show and being introduced to it. So it could have been right around this time. And the one thing that really stood out for me personally was the character that John Saxon was portraying in the fight scenes that he had with Steve Austin, which I felt were done very well at that time. Randy just asked if there was a Venus space probe. Not in this episode, but there was, Randy. You're actually absolutely correct about that.
And if anybody wants to follow along with us, we don't claim to be, have photographic memories of the episodes. So for purposes, if you see me glancing to my right, I have different types of content queued up so that it just jogs my memory. So if anybody wants to look up the episode, The Day of the Robot, if you have any questions on that, and then just put them in the chat.
Yeah, definitely. And for the folks out there, just to remind everyone, this is the episode that actually, if you remember John Saxon back from the day, John Saxon has done probably close to over 200 film and television appearances in his career. I mean, his career is literally goes back to them, 60 years. Sadly, he passed just a couple of years ago, but he's been in almost everything and everything. So, in fact, I was talking to Lou out there just not too long ago, just a couple of days ago, and I was saying, when I think of John Saxon as an actor, I always think of the other actor, Don Gordon, who did a lot of stuff back in the day. They were similar types, and sometimes I used to get them confused. There we go. But in regards to a lot of the things that he's done, if anybody remembers the 1984 horror film Nightmare on Elm Street, he was also in that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he definitely has a presence. Just want to say hi quickly to Chris LaRoche. He's joining us from Florida. Hey, Chris, thanks for joining us. Yep, the one with John Saxon, exactly. So, Jack, in regards to we're going to talk a little bit about the plot. So, in regards to this episode, it starts out with Steve essentially meeting a friend of his, and they're going to be, playing some tennis. And it seems like it's a weekly occurrence that they do, or maybe every other weekly occurrence
that they've done for years. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you picked up on it, and in regards to the whole ethical scenario in regards to him playing tennis.
Yeah. So I thought it was interesting. Like, Roy's more into the characters, and I'm looking at it in a little different light. And think about today and what we're all witnessing, right? And again, we're not talking about bionics, but there is some issues right out there. The issues that we're faced with today are issues where, sometimes men want to play and participate in women's sports, right? So not to get into the politics, I'm just bringing that up just as a topic. So, but what's the obvious disadvantage to that? the obvious disadvantage is, is that the muscle capacity of a male, out exceeds the capacity of of a female's musculature, right? So when you think about that for a second, as it applies to this particular episode, as I was watching this episode, this opening act, I was mesmerized by John Saxon. His character is Fred, and Fred kept on, commenting to Steve. He kept on saying, "Steve, I don't remember you being this good." And Steve's like, Steve's kind of like cool, calm, and collective. He doesn't. He's not. I don't think he's not projecting, a arrogance or a cockiness into his newfound capabilities, but nonetheless, he's got a superior advantage. And so during this tennis match, I noticed, which was interesting to note, Steve was using his bionic eye to pinpoint a particular spot on the foul line. And so basically he used his eye and his superior bionics, and was able to outsmart Fred. Again, John Saxon was able to outsmart him multiple times, to the point where he beat him in the game, and then played it off, and it was cool, calm, and collective. But when I was thinking about it for a second, I was like, wow, there are some ethical issues here as it applies to having those capabilities. So, I want to know, and again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot out there, but, what do you think of that? Is it okay for Steve? Now, keep in mind, Steve can't reveal his superior, new found, physical gifts, or his eye. So how should he play that off with a guy that's supposed to be a best friend of his? Should again, it's nothing but more than a show, but still, there are some ethics there, I think. What do you think, Roy?
Well, I think it's interesting that you brought this point up, because when I saw that, it reminded me of an episode that takes place, I believe, maybe a season or two later. And do you recall the episode with the football players? Larry Zonka, or no, was it Larry? Yeah, Larry Zonka was in it. I think Dick Butkus was in it. And there were Carl Weathers, who was known as Apollo Creed, was, the actor Apollo Creed in the Rocky movies, was in it. And I actually went back and I actually watched that episode just not too long ago. I was just, for whatever reason, I was thinking about it. And what happened was they had Larry Zonka on there, and I think he had his wife that was on with him, when the episode was being made. And he's not aware of Steve's bionics. And there's almost like a side bet that goes on or something, and he loses. And then what happens is they get into a jam because Larry Zonka gets kidnapped, and essentially Steve is bailing him out, and he has to reveal that he has the bionics, and he's pretty much, sworn to secrecy, and, he's involved with Oscar and everything. So right at the very end, when they're getting ready, he's getting ready to go out on the field to play the game. He's basically, Larry Zonka calls him out on it. He says, "Hey, Steve, you know that bet we had?" He goes, what's going on with those bionics? He goes, "You owe me $20. So they kind of addressed that. And I thought it was interesting watching this episode. And again, this is an earlier episode, that, they let that slide with this, literally, with the way what you just described in regards to the way he was aiming and using his bionics to, in tune with his vision, and then as well, the aim. However, in a later episode, which I believe was a season or two later, they did address it in the sense that, Steve kind of gets called out on it. And,
But what's interesting, Roy, is this, and I kind of, and again, it's the writing, but I also think a lot of it has to do with the acting. When you think of Lee Majors and just the way he positioned, his mannerisms and the way, and the inflections in his voice, and just how he acted through that, you got to consider. Remember when we talked about the pilot, right? And we talked about and how he had to emotionally come to terms with with the fact that he's an amputee, but now he's brand new again. So to Steve, Steve's not thinking, at least the way I read it, at the way he was, and the way he was acting through it. He's not looking at it like he's got an advantage. To him, this is his body.
Right.
It would be no different than if you played against, like if you were playing against a highly gifted sports figure that was super conditioned and you weren't. So Steve's he's not thinking through that. And I don't recall if there was an episode. I think Oscar Goldman may have briefed him in on his gifts and new capabilities and how he has to use it for good, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. But I don't think they ever really dove into that overall, and just dedicated a show on that. But I think it would have been interesting if they did.
Well, and there is a tie-in actually, and you bring up again, it's a great point you're bringing up. Jamie Summers, the character of Jamie Summers, was a professional tennis player, and when Steve winds up meeting up with her in an Ojai in the 2-part episode where they kind of rekindle their old romance and everything, she is in the area. She's in town because she's playing and everything. But what happens is once the accident occurs and they develop this whole story based on, she comes back from everything that happened to her with the parachute accident. She's very similar to Steve, and she loses both legs. She loses her right arm, but instead of it being her eye, it's her ear. And what happens is then she rejects the bionics, and then we think that she dies. And then they did that whole thing with the story because they wanted to bring back the character because of the fan response. But when she does come back and they can't have the relationship, and then she essentially gets her own series, instead of being a tennis player, she's a school teacher. And they went in a different direction with that because I think, in regards to what you're saying, it would have been unethical for them to, go in the direction. There's no way she could have really done that. Plus, she's working for the OSI as an agent, and they felt that her working as a school teacher is a lower cover. And an example of her using her powers, though, she's trying to get the respect out of her students, and what she does is she rips a phone book and right in front of them just to kind of scare them a little bit so that they will respect her.
Yeah, I remember that. That was an interesting series or episode.
I see a comment from Sean. Sean just said, I remember this episode well. The very first use of the bionic sound was used in this episode, but it was made by the robot played by Saxon. Absolutely.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
All right, Jack. Do you remember as kids us running around doing that?
Yeah. And what's that? I was talking to you about this because I'm watching my 9-year-old, and yes, I have a 9-year-old at 57 years old, so don't fault me for that. But anyway, I'm watching him, and I'm watching him, just play and act out different, things that he's doing. And I think by nature, children, everybody's there. We make sounds. We do sound effects, right? We want to play and role play. So this again, back to the series or this episode or just the $6 Million Man in general, it touched on so many things that you could do, or that you could act. Like after you watch the episode, you're out in the park, right? And we're all playing around. Or, when you think about it too, WWF wrestling as an example, right? Everybody pretends to do a figure 4 leg lock or a clothesline on somebody, or you're not going to do a pile driver, but you're playing, right? And it's a good opportunity to have that I think that was another real big appeal to this, to this series, especially at that point in our lives. And back then too, I think a lot of the people are older, like we are that are watching. There's no internet. Right. I think we started the show off by saying that we're using rabbit ears to tune into these shows. Right. Or if your antenna on your roof works, you're lucky to at least be able to get, and you only had a certain amount of channels. Yeah. So we were lucky enough for this. And I believe this was on channel what, Roy, do you remember?
Yeah. It was
in the New York area.
It was on ABC. It was on channel 7. And to your point, back in the day, I remember, in my parents, the stations, and I'll name them because they're so clear in my mind. 2 was CBS, 4 was NBC, 5 was WNEW out of New York City. It was like a syndicated station.
Right.
7 was ABC. You had WOR, which was Channel 9, which was in New York, and then I think it went to New Jersey. You had 11 WPIX and 11 Alive, which was back in the 70s. And then you had 13, which was the PBS station, which was, I think, maybe 52 now. But yeah, that was it. And we had the rabbit ears, and there was no cable. There was no 300 channels that you can get. There was no using your iPhone or your phone to watch YouTube videos or watch anything. You pretty much, you couldn't record anything. And I mean, we didn't have a VCR until later on. It was basically, the shows would run, if you would catch them when they were on. And then if you looked in the TV guide during the summer, you would see repeat. And that's when you would able to actually catch them in another run, if they were running those specific episodes, because it was only like 8 or 9 episodes that would be run in the summertime.
Yeah, so, absolutely. So Roy, what else stands out for you in this? We started with the opening statement of, the tennis match, right, between Fred and Steve, John Saxon and Lee Majors. What else stands out for you in this episode?
I would say, I mean, what was later on, I mean, there's, of course, you're knowing that they're trying to protect him, and Steve is there to protect him. He's going to be his bodyguard. You find out that there is a sergeant that is actually corrupt on the inside. So there you go. I mean, there's like a mole on the inside, which is going to sabotage this whole thing. And they even reference too that they want Fred, who is John Saxon, and Steve to be on their way to this military base, because essentially he's going to be delivering this device that's going to work with the
guidance. Yeah, it was the guidance missile, I believe, circuitry or guidance missile chip that needed to help protect Fred or John Saxon. He
had worked on it and he had helped perfect it. So essentially they had to make sure that they get from point A to point B, and it's a done deal, and it's within a certain time frame. But with this inside mole, this person is actually drugged his coffee, because they make that reference that when they were in the car, that his stomach is really bothering him, and this is John Saxon and Fred, and that he thinks Steve is going to have to pull over. Now, the backstory of everything that's going on here with this sergeant that's pretty much on the take is that we are introduced early on in the episode, before we get into all of this, that Henry Jones, for the folks out there who remember him, he was a character actor that did a tremendous amount of work. You probably, if you are a Lost in Space fan, he played Jeremiah Smith back in the day. He was also on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. His credits are endless, just like John Saxon's are. And believe it or not, he's from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and did work. He was on Broadway for some time back in the day. Again, he's got a list of credits for television shows as well as movies that are tremendous. And also he's with another person who is Lloyd Bachner, and he's playing Gavin Wilson. He's pretty much almost like the arms guy. He wants the guidance system, and he's after it, and he's using Dr. Dolan's to get to it. And again, Lloyd Bachner, another famous character actor. He's done so much stuff, and we'll talk more about him later. But anyway, with regards to that, what they're doing is Dr. Dolan's, who is Henry Jones, has essentially created almost like the perfect android. And what this android is going to do is they're going to have him impersonate Fred. And this whole
you know what I thought that was odd? Well, if we were going to poke holes in that one scene, right, which is the switch of real Fred with android Fred, right? I guess when they spiked his coffee with some type of, laxative, we'll say, and they must have had, I guess they must have planned out the route that he was taking,
Mhm.
where because again, Lee Majors or Steve was traveling with them. I guess they must have planned it out where they knew that there was going to be a rest area at it, because I thought that was that was the only thing that I was like, okay, so what are the odds that they're going to pull up to that rest area and the android replacement of Fred is in that bathroom waiting after,
Jacko, I'm right there with you. I was
yeah,
thinking the same thing because it's like what happens if his stomach is able to handle it,
right.
and what happens if he's going to go on to the to the next area. Yeah, I mean, it
But there
was almost
wasn't a lot. But you know what, Roy? There wasn't a lot to poke holes in, though. Even because it was like it quickly enters your head, but then you're so entertained by the overall concept of the show that you forgive it, right? And as I look at the ratings, like on IMDb, they rated this particular episode a 7.7 out of 10, I believe.
Mhm.
Yeah, 7.7 out of 10.
Which is
Which,
pretty good.
yeah,
That's not too bad. That's practically an 8. So it
yeah,
definitely holds up. And the actors,
absolutely.
you're dealing with actors that are, they know their craft, and it's not they don't this easily could have been corny. I mean, you could
Yes,
definitely go in a direction where it's like, okay, you know
yeah.
what? It's not like that though. So it's
When you mentioned Dr. Dolan's, one of the things I always looked forward to episodes where, where Dr. Dolan's makes his, appearance, right? Because he was always looking to do something to sabotage Steve. There's been plenty of other episodes that he's been in, where he's always coming up with a way, to replicate, the bionics that Steve has in some way, in some form. So he's always entertaining in these episodes.
this was the first of 3 episodes, and what's interesting is, and I'm curious out there, who remembers the fembots? I mean,
Oh,
that was huge back in the day.
oh yeah, fembots. And you know what's funny too? Just the name fembot, was, I remember feeling it was like it was kind of silly that they came up with that word, but or that name. But yeah, that stands out.
Yeah, this was a predecessor to the fembots, and the fembots was introduced by Dr. Franklin, who was portrayed by the well-renowned actor John Houseman, and they actually had done a crossover episode with that. So it was where one week it was on the Bionic Woman, one week it was on the $6 Million Man, and then the next week I think it was on the Bionic Woman. And if I remember, that 3-part episode or arc was called Kill Oscar, I believe
I
it
think it
was.
was. Yeah, it was Kill Oscar. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was around like 1976. So this was actually like laying the groundwork for the fembots, because this wasn't actually that, but it really was very similar. I see some comments that are coming in. I just want to just share some of the stuff
Sure.
that
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Chris is saying, yeah, ABC Channel 7. Sean, who's out in Colorado now, saying, I grew up in New Jersey. Those were my TV stations. And Charlene's agreeing ABC
Yeah.
as far as the network. Yep. And Chris is saying WNEW TV. Dan is saying, I'm using my iPhone to watch you now. Wow, now I'm feeling old. It's all right, Dan. You're in good company. Let's see. Charlene said it was the good old days. Absolutely, Charlene. And Chris said, Cheyenne Social Club, support your local sheriff, Henry Jones. Yep. It rated high. It was Steve's first super-powered one fight. Yes, it was. Exactly. And Chris is also saying that the fembots was a direct continuation of this one. Yeah, it really felt like that. Callahan was an awesome fembot. Yeah, that was Oscar's secretary. You're absolutely right, Jack. Lord, so ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah, we can laugh about it, Charlene. It's all good. But yeah, so later on, there's the episode where he's trying to Dolan's is kidnapping Oscar, and he's trying to replace Oscar to be, one of his robots is taking over. And then there's the third one, the episode which was called Run Steve Run, and that was I had originally told you about covering that, realizing that I meant this episode. So
Yeah, that's fine. It's all good.
But it's
And for those of you out there that want to just watch some of these shows, I came across it's a .org site that holds all of these shows, because I guess they're
it's the
is that
Internet Archive.
yeah. So if anybody listening out there wants to watch any of these shows for free, if you go onto the internetarchive.org, you can find but at least I didn't search for any other series, but the full series, all episodes are on this website, and it's a very easy to access website, and it's not bootleg, because it's a historic archive site protecting the arts.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of other, there's other movies and television shows on there too,
Yeah.
to your point. So no, it's nice that we're able to do that. Jeff commented, it's nice the fembots continue to work when they moved on to Austin Powers. I actually liked Austin Powers. I liked the first movie, but after the first movie, it just got a little too ridiculous for me.
So Roy, I heard you received. I made Roy a T-shirt for today's show. Did you received it? Yep.
Yes, in fact, thank you, Jack. Here it is.
So yeah, and I made one myself too. See, it's the same decal but a little smaller on a white T-shirt. I decided white and black so we could have like a yin and yang kind of thing going.
No, that was much appreciated.
Yeah. So let's how much again, my first time coming into one of your episodes, how much time do you dedicate to the show, Roy?
Anywhere between an hour or two. So wherever we are, we're doing fine.
So there's other things, and you, by the way, if anybody's hanging in there with us, if you have any questions, or if you want to explore, a conversation on a particular topic, yeah, please put it in the chat, and then and we'll dive right in. Back to the ethics, unless Roy, do you want to switch to something different, or do you want me just to continue on one or two more things on the ethical side?
No, we can continue on that. Absolutely.
So there's some other things that are that when we think about the ethics of, so think about what we were just talking about, where they made this switch of, the android Fred, right? So, when you think about voice duplication, right? When you think about the deep fakes that are out there, right? Think about that a deep fake can be used to do all sorts of things. As a matter of fact, there's warnings out there if anybody hasn't heard of this, but AI and I'll call it deep fake audio, has gotten to the point where your voice sometimes can be, I'll call it hacked or used against you, where once they get a voice pattern, and that's why sometimes you'll get these. You got to be careful when you get these, robocalls or whatever you want to call them, spam calls. They're asking you some questions. There's claim out there that they're trying to take imprints of your voice, so that then how would they use that against you? Well, if you have a child, or if you have a parent that's that needs your help, or if your parents think that you need their help. Imagine them receiving a call from Roy, and it sounds exactly like Roy. I mean, that's how crazy the AI. There's AI engines that can. So again, there's ethics on that. We don't have to get deep into. You can just use your imagination. So and then again, it can be used for even crazier things. I mean, when you talk about the leaders, leaders of nations, and just all kinds of crazy things can happen with that.
One thing, not to cut you off, it's really kind of scary though, because this is something that at that time frame, and again, this is 1973, 1974.
Right.
It's really not something that we as individually, or is you could even say in a town, or even in the cities or the country states as a country, we're really thinking of, because it really seemed like that would be something that would be in the future. The fact that you would have a machine that was replicating your voice, as does happen in this. They're taking samples of Fred's voice, John Saxon, and
Right.
what they're doing is they're creating a database so that it can mimic what he had spoken previously, and
Yep.
then also trying to get all of the, not, I won't say memories, because the data that they were expunging, it almost could have gone in that direction if they wanted to do, they wanted it to be almost more sci-fi-ish, and I think they do that in the episode with Oscar when he's taken. They don't do that in this episode, where they have Oscar's, being hooked up and everything, and it's almost like the information is being taken from Oscar and it's being transmitted into the computer, and that's definitely more sci-fi-ish. But it's, if you think about it, where we are today to what you are saying and how it relates, it's really not sci-fi-ish right now, because a lot of that can be done and is
Absolutely.
being done. So
Yeah. And what's crazy, Roy, is back then, it was that we viewed it as entertaining, and the plausibility of, let's say, an actual android with all those capabilities and looking identical, right, was far-fetched.
right.
But not anymore, right?
Yeah.
And and again, not anymore. It's still far-fetched when it comes to, let's say, the overall construction of an actual robot, with facial expressions and features, but they're getting close. So, but when we talk about just the implications of what that represents today versus then it was entertaining. Today, it's now kind of freaky. It's like, wow, you have to be careful, because there are bad actors out there that can do things to harm us all. The final thing that I was looking at is,
Excuse me.
there's two things, right? One, when you think of Steve Austin, Steve's a hybrid android, right? He still has a soul. He still has, he's still human, right, in mind. And then there's the android side of things, right? So when you think about AI and you think about, what all of what we're faced with today in our modern times, at what point do we have to put, and there has to be regulations, there has to be all kinds of protections in place, because you don't want war decisions being made, right? And we don't want, and again, there's just a lot to unpack in this, as you start looking at this, because this episode also is focused on, on the chips, on the guidance missile chips. So there's a war component in this episode as well, and that's the reason why, just for everyone listening, that's the reason why I'm talking about war in this conversation, because it's this overall episode is focused on protecting the intelligence of this particular guidance missile chipset and all of what that represents. What are your thoughts, Roy, on that?
No, it's very true. And what's scary is that indirectly, with what is happening in this, it's because someone is being masqueraded, somebody that is being impersonated, and it's not by another person, but it's by a computer, it's by a machine. And you could even say it's almost AI-ish, so to speak. And Dolan's is actually controlling it. But what happens when it goes to the next level? You know what I mean? And I think that's where Terminator actually comes into play,
Right.
too. With,
Exactly.
Terminator, with that, it's, Skynet becomes self-aware, and it wants to do its own things, and it wants to replicate itself, and that's going into a different path, but still it's all interconnected, so to speak, with that. And granted, we're going back 50 years, but it's kind of laying the groundwork with that. And really, with what they were trying to protect, this is what Steve is on the other side. And interesting enough, if you think about it, and this is something I'm just thinking now, you have Cyborg that is protecting against the automaton. And both have machines, but then there's the human component. And what does Steve do when right at the end too? He doesn't even try to just take that device. He just throws it. And with the way he throws it, I mean, it's gonna bust into a million pieces, but it's for the safety to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And it's man against machine. And in this scenario, man wins. So I think that's a scenario, or there's a theme with that as well too.
Absolutely. And so again, I guess we kind of answered, really what has to be in place in regards to the big picture, right? Just in today's world, you cannot lose the human intervention. There has to be controls always in place. There always has to be somebody that can flick the switch and shut it off.
Right.
You can't, if that is eliminated, we're in trouble.
Absolutely. I would agree. I would 100% agree. Just looking at comments coming through.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. On Peacock, I can see the comment, and that's why I did a search on the internet, because you have to be a member, or you have to subscribe to Peacock to watch the episodes.
Yeah, which is nice that it actually can be viewed on the Internet Archive.
But if you already have Peacock, then it's a win all around for you.
Absolutely. And and it's like Chris said, and as well as Jack, a cyborg. Yeah. So that's going back to what you were saying, Jack, though. Yeah, it's the human element and that's what's present throughout all of these episodes. That's what Lee Majors brings to this in his interpretation of the character and the character of Steve Austin. In fact, it's interesting too. And I don't recall the episode, but in fact, it might even be. Do you remember the $7 Million Man with Monty Markham?
No, I don't.
Interesting enough, Monty Markham, he's another character actor who's done a lot of stuff. There were 2 episodes in which he was in the $6 Million Man. One was entitled actually the $7 Million Man, and then there was a subsequent episode after that. And in this episode, it's interesting because Steve sees Fred do some amazing things, because what's happening is the android is malfunctioning. It cannot control the speed of the car. Dolence is trying to get his henchman, we'll say his technician, to control it remotely. And there seems to be things going on where he can't regulate the foot pedal of the gas. So at one point he's doing 35 miles an hour. Another point he's doing 80 miles an hour. And then what happens is they wind up crashing into a ditch. And Steve gets out of the car and doesn't realize that this is not Fred, because he's been taken. And he says, I can get us out of this, but you got to promise not to say anything. Now, this is a very close friend of his, and he's trusting him. And what he does is he uses his bionics to lift the car out of the ditch. What happens then is Fred, or I should say the android, mimics what Steve did, because there's a malfunction in his programming from when Dolence was setting him up, and literally picks up the back end of the car and moves it. And Steve watches it, and he's in dismay, and he's just like, that's a great trick, Fred. He doesn't know what to think. And even at one point, when he calls Oscar to let him know that they've actually have to stay at a hotel overnight because Fred isn't supposedly feeling well, which the android is saying that he's not, just kind of stall things off. Steve asks Oscar and says, is there another one of me? And he's like, no. And then he brings up the possibility that maybe there is another Dr. Rudy Wells that could have created another type of cyborg, not realizing that this isn't a machine, totally an android. But later on, with Monty Markham, he actually is a race car driver that actually has an accident. But what's different about him is he loses both legs and he loses both arms, but he doesn't have an eye or an ear replacement. So that's why they deemed him the $7 million man. And also another interesting fact is Monty Markham was originally considered for the role of Steve Austin, but then it went to Lee Majors. And I have to say that the two actors are very good. They definitely, Monty Markham would have definitely done a good job, I would say, as an actor. But I would also say that in regards to, and I'm going to, kind of go off into a different direction. Originally with Star Trek, for the role of Captain Kirk, it was first it was Captain Pike, which was Jeffrey Hunter, and then Jeffrey Hunter wasn't available to come back. So what they did was they made another character, which was Captain Kirk. They had considered Jack Lord and Lloyd Bridges, and then they went with William Shatner. And I'm not saying, Jack Lord, we all know, Hawaii Five-0, back in the day, 1968 to 1980. And then you had Lloyd Bridges, who was known for Sea Hunt. Both fine actors, excellent actors. But in regards to what William Shatner brought, the dynamics to the character of Captain Kirk, I would say the same thing could be said with
Lee Majors. Yeah.
Lee Majors as Steve Austin. Nobody else could have done it, as we know the character anyway.
Yeah, and again, he brought, again, the term masculinity, pops into your head, but again, he's playing the role, but he's playing it, and again, for the times that everything was appropriate, just his overall demeanor and how he carried himself, throughout the series, I thought was very appropriate for the character.
Absolutely. Some comments that are coming through. Charlene said Lee has better legs. Chris said he was also stronger than Steve because he had more leverage. Yeah. Charlene said, don't forget the Bigfoot episode. It was not great. Yeah. And actually, Charlene, interesting enough, with the Bigfoot episodes, there were two actors, and I'm going to put that out there for folks to see. Two actors or two individuals, I'll say, that portrayed Bigfoot, and I'm curious to see if the folks out there remember who that is. Chris is saying Lloyd Bridges would have been interesting. Yeah,
I just read some research that talks about Lee Majors being hesitant to take on the role. I'm just trying to get some additional info on that. If anybody knows why, maybe you can type that in the chat.
There you go. That I did not know.
Yeah, I'm going to try and pull that up to see what that means. Because I was just trying to pull it up, and then all of a sudden, it wants you to subscribe to a newsletter, and you can't. Then it locks the screen, and you can't get the information you need.
Yeah, there's only so much that you can see then. In regards to Lee Majors, though, it's interesting too, because his first series that he got, which was in 1965, was The Big Valley, which was with Barbara Stanwyck and Richard Long, for the folks out there who remembers The Nanny and the Professor, watching that back in the day. And also Linda Evans was also in that series. Peter Breck, and it was a really, really good family show as well, taking place back in the Old West. Chris LaRoche is saying Ted Cassidy played him second. You're absolutely right, Chris, in regards to that.
Does anybody know how old Lee Majors is today? If you can type that in the chat, little trivia.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how old he is. That blows me away.
He's actually not that old, but again, he's getting up there.
Yeah. And I have to ask you, Jack, did you watch The Fall Guy back in the day?
Yes and no. Not enough to be able to comment on it, but
no, I watched it sporadically too. I didn't watch it all the time.
Yeah.
I knew it was on between 81 and 86, but I didn't watch that on a regular basis. But it was only a few years after he did the $6 Million Man, though.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up, but I thought it was interesting that it's saying that he was hesitant to take on the role.
Yeah.
almost didn't hear. Let's see if I can get this without having to subscribe to something.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Charlene. He was Heath. Yep, he was the a son of the Barclay. Chris is saying Fall Guy had a cute song. Yeah, it was a good song. Charlene said that she really liked the Big Valley. Bill, thanks for joining us, and you are absolutely right. Lee Majors is 84 years old.
84, yes, he is.
Yep. Yeah, he's done a lot of the autograph shows, and if you're in the New Jersey area, or if you're even the Pennsylvania, New York area, there's something called Chiller Theater. It's almost like what they have out west in California and Los Angeles, which is like an autographic type show. And Lee Majors has appeared at these events. Very, very pleasant. I actually almost had the opportunity to meet him, and I really regret that I did not. And that was about a little over 10 years ago. But everybody that has.
Hey, Roy, hot off the presses. Ryan Gosling to take over the role made famous by Lee Majors.
Oh, there you go. Huh.
And that role, let's see, does it look like the Fall Guy?
Oh, yeah. I think you're right. Yes, I heard about that. Yes.
It looks like the Fall Guy. I was hoping it was going to be the $6 million or probably $6 billion man. Yeah. So Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt, the Fall Guy.
Oh, wow. Charlene saying,
and it's a poster. I guess the movie's there's an official trailer out there too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it's going to happen then, folks.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, wow. Huh. Bill said late to show when identified as cyborg. Also the title of novel. Yes, exactly. You're absolutely right. Randy, yes. Dave Prowse, Darth Vader. I actually met him, believe it or not. Jack said, Harv Bennett said when he saw Lee Majors walking across the studio parking lot, coming in for his audition with his jacket slung over his shoulder and toothpick dangling from his lips and a certain swagger in his step, he said out loud, "Here comes Steve Austin."
And Jack, what you just posted there, without even reading that or knowing, that somebody commented on that was on the set at the studio. That's kind of how I feel about Lee Majors and what he brings to the role. Like they could have even kept his name as Lee Majors. You know what I mean? They didn't because even the name Lee Majors has a nice ring to it, and it's his actual name. So, but definitely, and that's what was very appealing. Was. Without him, I don't think it could have been pulled off. I mean, for that time in those days, does anybody have any thoughts on who could have potentially pulled off the role of Steve Austin?
That's a great question, Jack. Yeah, and again, you got to think back 50 years ago because
right. And you have Burt Reynolds back then. You had Clint Eastwood. You had. There was a bunch of people, but and the reason why I'm naming those two, because those are men's, and again, I'm not trying to be politically correct, but they had that masculinity, right? They had that kind of strength to who they were as people.
Well, what's interesting, Jack, what you just said? You just mentioned Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds actually tried out for the part of Heath Barclay, which was on the Big Valley, which was the series that Lee Majors got, and they went with Lee Majors instead of Burt Reynolds. And this is back before Burt Reynolds was doing episodic television back in the day. I mean, he was on Gunsmoke.
Yep.
He actually did a Twilight Zone episode, and he did other things. So he was trying to get into that. So it's interesting that you made that comparison because he would potentially have been a possible choice, although I think maybe around that time he may have been trying to get into the movies, but really the same type of character as far as an actor. So now that was
even a character like a Lee Van Cleef too, mm-hmm. As you think about that type of person, or even a Kurt Russell, could have pulled. I think could they have pulled it off? Maybe. But again, you know, I think the casting was perfect, you know, with Lee Majors.
No, definitely. Chris commented Lee Majors was hesitant because he was co-starring with Arthur Hill, another famous character actor, in Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law at the time. There you
Okay,
go.
Chris, thanks for finding that. I was trying to pull it up, but every time I did a search for it, I got this subscription block that it wouldn't let me scroll to get the answer.
May commented, I met Lee Majors at our local fan expo. He's a very charming man. I had a huge crush on him back in the day. And let's see here. Charlene said, love Ryan. You know, speaking of Ryan too, it's you know, I'm thinking of a different Ryan. Unfortunately, very sad in the news that Ryan O'Neal just passed.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, and Ryan O'Neal and actually Lee Majors were really good friends back in the day too. And you know, we're talking about Lee Majors, and subsequently, you know, Lee Majors. Everybody remembers Farrah Fawcett, and you know, what was Farrah Fawcett Majors back then. They were on the TV guides together, and then he had this show, and then she went on to do Charlie's Angels, which was back in, I think it premiered in '75.
Yeah.
It's all in that time frame. Bill commented, watched Fall Guy, wanted to be a stuntman when I was a child, falling downstairs stunts, regret now, 56-year-old, lots of laughs. You're in good company, Bill. We're all in the same age range. Bert tried for Star Wars Han Solo. I think I remember hearing that. Yep. Robert Conrad, perhaps, if he was a bit taller. Yeah. I'll tell you, in regards to Jack, were you a Wild Wild West fan?
Again, another one of those series that, you know, I tuned in, but not really watching it a lot. Well, yeah. What are your thoughts on that for bringing that up?
I love that show. I mean, it was when Bill mentioned about Robert Conrad. I mean, that was a show I didn't watch all the time, but it's like when it was on and I caught it. I think Channel 9, where we grew up at the time, was running it, and I never got to see the black and white episodes the first season until like much later on, and how everything came about. I thought that you know, Robert Conrad was like the macho hero type, and then, you know, you had Artemis Gordon, who, you know, Ross Martin, who was more, you know, he was the creative brains. He was always doing the makeup, and he was always playing different characters, and he was really very talented with that, and they really complemented each other very well. And you know, I remember reading about all these, you know, Robert Conrad loved to do his own stunts, and he would hang out with the stunt guys. And I think one time he fell off they had like a standing set where it was like 2 levels, and he fell, and he got hurt pretty bad. But it was a good action show that I enjoyed.
There's as I'm flipping through some of the still shots of Day of the Robot, I came across came across a couple of photos of that one scene in the episode where you know, where the character has a sweatsuit on, and he picks up a barbell, right? And he lifts the barbell over his head. Now, the reason why I'm commenting on that is because back in the 70s, you know, with the exception of, let's say, Schwarzenegger and others, exercise wasn't really it was so front and center.
Yeah.
And so when you look at what the amount of weight as I look at the bar that this person's picking up over their head with one arm, although heavy, it's not out of the question that somebody that's conditioned today, which many people are, would be able to do the same thing. So it's interesting to see how they incorporated strength and bionics, but really, you know, again, with the proper conditioning, you know, and modern times, a lot of people are going to the gym, and that really wasn't the case back then.
That's a great point. It's now it's more commonplace, but then it was, if to see somebody being able to do that really stood out. Whereas today, seeing that, it's not as impressive, so to speak.
Exactly. So there's like a lot of differences in the times, but nonetheless, it's just interesting to see that.
Yeah. And actually, let's see. I'll throw some slides up so some folks can see some of the images. from the show. And this is where they had just on the tennis court, and Steve is kind of kidding with Fred about how he lost the tennis match. This other photo is the android because he's got the face mask on. Obviously, it's John Saxon, but we were talking about the fights earlier too, and I think it was Sean who brought up about how this was the episode that pretty much introduced what would later become the bionic sound effects that we would hear anytime Steve would be doing any type of jumping or type of fast motion. Only in this episode, it's really the android that actually has that. And
Roy, the music, I should say that, yeah, I would say the music soundtrack too is kind of catchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you knew based on that track, and I don't know if we can play it, but you knew that even if you weren't watching the show and you weren't in the same room and you heard that song, you knew that the $6 Million Man was on.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
It would be like listening to the opening credits for MASH, right? Or even for Star Trek at the in the beginning, the same that at the time, I guess they had there were different songs and different that they always played in every episode,
right.
When there was an action scene.
Yeah, and it alerted you that was you could almost like say it was like Steve Austin's theme song almost.
Right.
I mean, it represented Steve, so you knew that when it was being played, he was showcasing his bionics, or he was showcasing his, I won't even say the bionics, it was showcasing his character to the next level, so to speak. You knew something, almost like something, he was going to do something good or extraordinary when they were playing.
And that's what these clips or these pictures that you're displaying remind me of, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing too is whether again, when you think about like the action or the I'll call it the fight scenes, it was slightly cheesy only because if Steve's got this incredible gift of bionics, and again, in this scene, he's fighting the android who's equally as strong. But in other episodes, there's the devastation that Steve would be able to do, would be off the charts, in a fight scene. But I noticed that there were a few episodes where when Steve grabbed you and he flung you, you could see, like, there was one particular episode, where he's fighting some bodybuilders, and the guys are twice the size of him, and he's throwing them across the field. But just a lot of interesting things that stand out when I look at this particular episode and then the overall series.
Yeah, no, definitely. Hey, Jack, somebody pointed out you have a Band-Aid that's hanging on you.
Yeah, this Band-Aid is here because I had some work done on my throat. I went to the dermatologist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure you're okay.
No problem.
Let me see here. Some of the comments that came through too is, let me see. Charlene said she met Lee at an event in LA in late 80s. Unfortunately, he didn't buy me a drink. And Chris said Wild Wild West was great, but they ran it on CBS, but not on Sunday at 7 p.m. I got preempted for football, ran late. Gotcha. Yeah. And Chris said, love the metal on metal sound effects during the fights. Yeah. No, and again, everything, excellent point that you brought up about, in regards to the music and everything. And it's something that they ran throughout the entire series too, which it was a way of reinforcing the character with what they did with that.
And they developed a brand, and the brand was repeatable, and it worked. And there were certain characters, like Sloan, right, and Doctor. So all of these characters just worked, and they were able they were able to repurpose them in different storylines, which was interesting. You always looked forward to, to the next episode and how it was going to develop. And then sometimes they would have a continuation of one episode versus another,
Right.
even if they didn't really announce it. Like for instance, when you and I were talking about just prepping for this particular show,
Mhm.
you asked me to watch that other episode. And I forgot what the name is. But then as
Oh,
I was, yeah, what was
okay.
the
Run, Steve, run.
Run Steve Run? And then there was, so in Run Steve Run, there was mention to a whole another episode that was like 3 or 4 episodes before this one.
Right.
And again, it was all about the diabolical doctor and him trying to get his hands on Steve's bionics, and and then Oscar not believing Steve that that they're coming after him and that he should just relax, and that was a whole nother episode. But and then it came full circle where they where he believed him, and again, there was always something happening within these episodes.
And Jack, you just brought up another good point too. A lot of episodic television back in the day, especially more so in the 60s, I believe, and the 70s, they really didn't do story arcs where there was a continuation. Now,
Right.
you might have like a part 1, part 2, part 3, so the story obviously would carry over into the next episode. But it wasn't very common where you would actually have something that's referenced in, or you'd have a certain story, let's say in season 1, episode 10, and then you go into season 3, episode 15, and then they're referring to something back from season 1. And the reason potentially they didn't do it too is because then if they're doing that, they might have to actually pay the writer from the original episode. But there really wasn't that bridging, and the fact that they did do that with this makes it fun because it gives you some form of continuity. I always like to refer back to Star Trek, but what's happened is with Star Trek, I mean, the Next Generation started doing it, and then subsequent shows started doing it after that, where they would almost have like these small story arcs that would take place, and then they would continue on. And then even with the more recent shows, it's almost like if you watch if you're going to watch all the way through, or if you're going to watch all the way through, you have to, because if you miss the first episode or if you miss the second episode, you're lost. It's not like episodic TV where a story is a standalone. And personally, I like the balance. I like where, you can watch something and you can enjoy it for what it is. It's nice to have the connections every now and then, but I think that depending upon what you're watching, especially in 2023, it's actually gone to the extreme. So it's interesting when you watch something that's taken place, and it kills me to think that this is 50 years ago, but it is, that how different programming and writing was then. I always like to say every decade has its own tone. Like when I watch something, I can tell this is 1960s, this is 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. It's just there's
But
it's
what's
whether
funny you say that too, because now that we're in the 2000s, it was always identifiable, Roy, right? I don't, would you say that's also true I don't think it's that true anymore in the 2000s.
I don't think I think you're right. I personally don't watch. I can't even tell you who's on television right now. I mean, I we don't actually have cable because we really don't watch it. It's more, we have the streaming services and we'll watch, the news and different things of that nature. But when it comes to watching current television, and I'm not, for anybody out there that likes what's out there, I'm not taking away from it. I'm just saying for me personally, I can go back and watch a lot of these shows over and over again. But when it comes to things that are being done today, for me personally, it doesn't hold up to the way it did
No,
back then.
but again, if you're searching for that, I think I think like or companies like Netflix, right, and
Mhm.
others, that they're putting they're spending their money on homegrown content and on programming.
Yeah.
And so you can find some of that. There are some interesting series. I don't know if you've explored that or not. I know we're talking about the $6 Million Man, but I'll just quick mention, on season 2 of what I'm looking forward to, Reacher. I don't know if you've originally Tom Cruise played, Jack Reacher in the movies, but Reacher looks very, very good. If you should do a quick search on that, and there's a teaser trailer for season 2.
Okay.
But if you haven't seen season 1, it's worth it. I like it a lot.
Gotcha. Yeah, and again, it's not to say that there isn't things out there that aren't enjoyable. And I did see that movie with him,
Sure.
and we definitely enjoyed that, it was very good. It's just, I guess there's a lot of nostalgia in regards to the old stuff. But let me ask you something, Jack. Were you one to watch television shows repeatedly in regards to, like, if you saw something once or twice, would you go back and watch it more than that?
Well, MASH, when we were children, right? Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Loved, never missed an episode of MASH, never missed an episode of Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Star Trek, you are, both your head and shoulders deep into Star Trek, but I'd like to think that I'm close. I'm not as much of an authority on on the series as you, but I'm very, especially the William Shatner years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's others. There's as far as just, and then believe it or not, like flipping over to game shows, I was always a big fan of Match Game,
Yeah.
with and so especially in the 70s, that. So I would follow series as often as I could, but again, it wasn't like there wasn't it was tough, especially growing up, in the situation that where I came from. There was a lot of interference on not being able to focus on series like that.
Sure. No, and you brought up, it's interesting that you mentioned Match Game. Loved Match Game. I I actually have the recollection of when it would go from, like, and I think if I remember, Match Game was on even in the 60s, but with the Gene Rayburn, I'll say the Gene Rayburn years, I think that started in either 72 or 73, which is 50 years ago. So that's celebrating the 50th anniversary. But I always thought it was so cool when it would go, because they would call it Match Game 72 or Match Game 73. And I thought when it was New Year's, you know what I mean, in regards to, they would have to change the background, or they would retitle the episode. As a kid, that stood out in my mind, thinking, okay, this is going to be really cool, because the show's going to change its title because we're going into the next year. And it's
you can find it streaming on, if anybody has Plex, or I should say a Roku stick or a Roku TV. It streams for free. But Gene Rayburn, for his time, I think his humor is still as fresh. It's just so funny to watch. It's like even watching the old reruns of Johnny Carson, right?
Yeah.
And then so, like, recent series, or maybe not so recent series that that a lot of people got involved with, was The Walking Dead. I don't know if you became a fan of that or not.
Ironically enough, I was mentioning about the Chiller conventions, and they've actually had cast members from The Walking Dead there. And so many people have said to me, Roy, you've got to check it out. And I have not actually seen an episode of that. And I, love the zombie movies, just have an appreciation for them. But this being a series and everything, but it's just something that I never delved into. And part of it is almost a fear that if I started, I know that I would probably have to go the old.
You'd have to. Yeah, that the way you're built and the way you think, there would be no question that you'd have to start from episode 1.
Yeah.
And yes, there is gore, but there's again, there's a lot of everything that we're talking about in regards to what pulls you into a series, or just to, there's a lot of really good character content, and then there's the development of characters in different series, and then you get so attached to these characters, and again, and then there's changing of the guard, I'll call it. New characters emerge, and but you're totally always engrossed in it. It's really good.
Some comments that came through. Let's see, Chris heard Star Trek and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Time Tunnel favorites. Did you get to see Time Tunnel by any chance, Jack?
No, I haven't. And you know what that name? Why is I don't think I've ever heard of Time Tunnel before.
Interesting enough, and because again, we grew up. We're talking about where we grew up and everything.
Yeah.
I had not either. I came across Time Tunnel was actually a production by Irwin Allen, and he did Lost in Space. He did Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and he also did Land of the Giants, which I'm going to suspect that you probably didn't see Land of the Giants either, right?
I think I may have. Was it just a movie, Land of the Giants, or was it a series?
It was a series. It was on for
then the answer is no. I haven't seen. Yeah.
They, for whatever reason, Land of the Giants and the Time Tunnel were not shown in our area when we were kids. They're both shows from the from the 60s. Time Tunnel was on for a year. Very similar to Quantum Leap. Similar but different, I'll say.
I loved Quantum Leap. Yeah, that was a favorite.
It definitely was. Definitely a predecessor. Same type of topic or plot line where they're two scientists are essentially leaping to different time periods is what it is. But unlike Quantum Leap, where they're actually inhabiting someone else's body and then they're taking on that persona and they look like that, Dr. Sam Beckett, who is played by oh my goodness, it's going right out of my head, and he was on Enterprise too. I'm slipping here. But anyway, it's different where it's Robert Colbert and Darren James Darren. They're the two actors playing the scientists. But anyway, it wasn't. I actually was able to watch those shows because they were shown on the Philadelphia stations here as opposed to the New York stations. So that's why I was curious if you had seen them. Let me see here. Charlene said, I don't have cable either. Not worth it. Yes. And I'm with you, TV today, except for streaming shows. There's not much to watch on the network. And Chris is saying the writing was much better back in the day. Also, The Fugitive was about the only series that had a full story arc that ran through the whole series back in the 60s and the 70s. Yeah. And Jack said, I was freaked out during the fight scene when the android's face mask got knocked off until my dad said, wait a minute, what happened to his mouth? Steve didn't knock his teeth out. There's a speaker with his tongue was. These effects aren't very special. I had to be careful watching sci-fi shows with my dad. He could be a bit of a buzzkill. Let's see. Bill's saying Time Tunnel on MeTV at 4 a.m. or on Sundays. Thanks, Bill, for sharing that. And you can see them both on MeTV on Saturday nights. But instead, you're watching our show tonight. So we're glad to have you here instead of watching those shows. But let me see here. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to we mentioned it before too was in regards to the toys. So Kenner actually had a whole lineup in regards to the $6 Million Man, and it was funny. I remembered a commercial that they called this android something that the kids called him, that there was a name for him, and I couldn't remember what it was. So if you want to check out any of these ads back from the day, vintage commercials, all you have to do is go on YouTube, because YouTube is great for that. And they basically based it on, I feel, this character, and they called him Maskatron. And they actually have a mask that you could actually put on him. But there were different types of Steve Austin incarnations. They, of course, then later on did for the Bionic Woman as well. And if you're curious and you want to check out the website, you can actually go to the website that I have there and check it out. And actually, what I'll do is I will put that into the chat so you can actually look that up at your.
A sealed $6 Million Man doll is selling for $500 on eBay.
Wow.
No, unopened.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah. Huh.
There's the yeah, and the I put into the chat. It's actually, if you're curious, you can check it out, folks. It's essentially just a link to the different collectibles that they have available for that. But it's there was a lot of stuff in regards to it. And one of the things we like to do on the show is we like to say all roads lead to Star Trek, and that connection here is with one of the writers of this episode was Harold Livingston. And for the folks out there who remember Star Trek the Motion Picture, the screenplay, incidentally, Star Trek the Motion Picture just celebrated 44 years with the release on December 7th of 1979. And he, like I said, Harold Livingston was responsible for the screenplay. And then, of course, there's Harv Bennett, who was the producer of the $6 Million Man. And then he also went on to write and also produce some of the Star Trek movies as well. And Jack, were you a Starlog magazine collector?
I remember I actually have 2 Starlog magazines. I didn't collect them. I just happened to purchase 2 magazines that had some interesting information in there. But at that time, I never threw anything away. And I remember I was mentioning to you, I have this vintage, big, leather suitcase that my great grandmother owned, and it's stuffed to the brim with comic books from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And 2 of these magazines are in there. I had cracked it open. I also I was trying to find the $6 Million Man comic book that I had, but I know where it is, but it's not accessible right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, I actually had some of my first Starlog magazine from back in the day. I actually remember the issue was issue number 12. And it had the mothership from Close Encounters of the Third Kind on it. And I remember my dad brought it home. And the only reason why I knew about Starlog was because another friend from this area had actually collected, not collected, but he had purchased, he'd gotten them. And the first issue that he got was issue number 2, which was Space 1999, which everybody knows how much I love that show as well as Star Trek. And it had a picture of Martin Landau and Barbara Bain as Commander Koenig and Dr. Russell on the cover. And then it also had a smaller image of Tony and Maya, Tony Ann Holt and Catherine Schell. And then the next Starlog that came out that he had was number 3, which was with the convention pictures of a painting of the images from a Star Trek convention. And then this one was the 4th one. And this is the one that featured the $6 Million Man. And it has an interview with Richard Anderson in it, which was kind of cool. Sadly, Starlog magazine went out of print 15 years ago, and they made its way into the 300s, I believe, and it was back in 2008. So it's been 15 years already that it's gone out of print, but it definitely was good back in the day. And I always like to give it a note because, as we didn't have the internet as so many, we were talking about that earlier. Right now, I mean, we're so accommodated. I don't want to say spoiled, but we are really able to just, Google and find a lot of cool facts, which is really neat. I think if we had this stuff back in the day, how different things would have been, right?
Well, there was, I remember, and again, you left the area, but I would cross the bridge to go to the bookstore in Passaic on Main Avenue in Passaic, and it was a comic book store with magazines, and that's where I picked up a couple of copies of Starlog. And it again, they sold used and as well as new comics and magazines and records too.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it I forgot what the name of the store was, but it lasted for a long time, and it had anything that you'd want, like one of those vintage comic book stores.
It's interesting too because my recollection from that area, everything was like so contained because I would think in terms of Wallington and then Garfield, and then
Right.
that was like on the left hand side, and then if you went the other way, you go through Hasbrook Heights and then Lodi, and then that's how we would go to New York to visit my grandparents because they lived in the city. And it's
Well, a lot of people sometimes you would take the bus from Main Avenue and Passaic to go in because it was a straight route. So that's why a lot of people would go to Passaic on Main Avenue to take the bus. And then if you wanted to take the bus into New York, I don't know if you remember the street Patterson Plank Road,
yeah.
but that was like one of the local routes to get into New York.
Gotcha.
And yeah, they had, and even in New York, there was during that time period, comic book stores were really popular. And I remember there was right outside of the Lincoln Tunnel, there was a really large store there. I forgot what the name was, but it was right inside New York.
To your point, there was a comic book, or it was, and actually, I think if I'm not mistaken, and there's some folks out there who may know this, and actually, Doug Drexler, because he was from New York. I think, what was it? Forbidden Planet, I think was the big one. And actually Doug is very connected with the Star Trek, incarnations, and he actually he got an Academy Award for working on Dick Tracy for doing makeup. And then what was that? I think in 1990 he got that. But anyway, I think Forbidden Planet was the place that had a lot of the comics, and they had props and things of that nature. So that was in the 70s, and that was the place to go. So that and we were like so close to the city being there. It's amazing because you're talking like 45 minutes away by bus. If
oh yeah, it was very, very convenient if you wanted to go into New York.
Yeah, it was right there. Let me see. Chris said they briefly ran a $6 Million Man series in a black and white magazine format. It was very goo. I don't even know.
I think it's good. He has a typo there.
Oh, yep, very good. Bill said Elite Comics got 6 Million Man figure more reasonable. Oh no, I'm sorry, Chris. No worries. Don't worry. No problems with that. Let's see. Sean is saying he still has a Steve Austin. That's pretty good. Yeah, but
did you own did you own a Steve Austin doll? You did? Yeah.
I did. I got that for Christmas. The two big Christmas presents that I remember. That I think I got that in 75. And also it was separate. It was the Steve Austin action figure. And then there was the rocket. You would open it up, and then it was almost like it was like his operating table, and you would put him in it, and then you could connect. You would roll up his sleeve, and then they would have the artificial skin, and then they had the power packs that would come out. I think there were two of them, and then you could connect it. And that was the big Christmas gift I remember for 70. I think it was 75. I got those, and then 76 was the Mattel Eagle from Space 1999. I was so ecstatic, and it's pretty much like the size. My friend Lou, and I think Lou's still out there. Lou actually constructed this. Lou made a fan film back in the 80s and did special effects and everything, and he built that from scratch. And it's the Eagle from Space 1999. But there was an Eagle that was put out by Mattel that came out in 76, and it was about close to that size, and it was the toy that everybody wanted, and that was my my big Christmas present. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Roy, what would you say? I mean, aside from, from the show, is what is one of the what's a hobby that you have or that stands out? Like, and again, could be anything. Like what would you say is something that you like focusing time on?
When I have the time to do it, it's doing like community theater. I very much
Okay.
enjoy doing that. Doing murder mystery dinner theaters. I've done it pretty much on and off over the last 30 some years. In fact, during the shout outs, I'll be giving a shout out to Country Gate tonight because they're actually having their opening night. And that's how Shari and I actually met, was through the theater, which was really cool.
Nice.
The common interest. But yeah, I would say doing that. Believe it or not, I really like bowling, but I kind of got away from it because I got really frustrated with it because it would be kind of sporadic. I would throw, I could throw a 200 game and be feeling really good, and then I'll throw like a 140.
So bowling is interesting because that Wallington, as a small town that you grew up for a few years of your life there, has I'll call it an AMF bowling alley, or if that's the right acronym, but it's a pro circuit bowling alley in a 1 square mile town. So at the time when we were younger, what were the two standout bowlers that everybody watched? It was like during that time when Wide World of Sports was on. I think what was it, Lou something or Ron or something? Earl Anthony. Yes, Earl Anthony actually bowled at Wallington Lanes.
Did he really?
Yeah,
wow.
and it was because he was doing his tour, right?
Oh.
So since it was on the pro bowling, it was one of the pro bowling circuit bowling alleys. AMF. It was a AMF recognized bowling alley. And so your game of bowling, did you get involved with? And I was never on a league. My brother was, and others that, my mother, father. Did you use a fingertip ball or a yellow dot ball or
later on I did. I used the fingertip inserts, and that the reason for that is it's supposed to give you a better spin when you're
right.
When you're a better hook, I'll say. That came later. My grandfather actually introduced me to bowling because my grandparents lived in Astoria, Queens, and we were so close to New York, we would go there every Sunday. And it was kind of a ritual. What we would do is we would go bowling. It was right on, for the folks that live in the New York area or are familiar with New York or Astoria, Queens, there's one of the streets was Ditmars Boulevard. And off on Ditmars Boulevard, there was a bowling alley that was there for the longest time. Unfortunately, they knocked it down, and I think they put a Keystone, which is like a grocery store, that's there now, or it's probably something else if Keystone isn't there. But that was something, and that's how I became interested in bowling and doing that.
Well, if you're ever making your way into New York, and you, let's say, happen to use the Port Authority as your port of entrance, the Port Authority, and I guess it's a little aged now, maybe not so much. They put several $1 million into rehabbing the bowling alley within the Port Authority. I believe it's on the 2nd floor. And but it's just it's very high tech, really nice. You would really like it. So I would check that out next time if you happen to be in the city.
Now I have to return the question, Jack. So what would you say you're in regards
my hobby?
Yeah.
Really, I would say I don't know if I'd call it a hobby, but I've gotten really involved with my health. And going to the gym a lot. So that's something that's important to me. I don't know if that's considered a hobby. It shouldn't be a hobby. It should be, just a way of life. But other things that I used to do was, that I focused on as a hobby would be model building or doing puzzles. Lately we've got my wife and my daughter and her boyfriend and my other daughter, we'll all sit down and we get the really complicated puzzles and we spread them out on the on the kitchen table, and we're working on puzzles. And then when we complete the puzzles, we're gluing them onto, onto a cardboard backing, and then mounting them in picture frames and hanging them on the walls.
That's great.
So yeah, and it's a nice bonding experience. Actually, it's gotten to the point now where we've gotten so focused on puzzle making that I'm like, hey, there's some content here. We should have a webcam or something just focused on the table. I think people would be interested in watching the progression of these complicated puzzles come to life.
Now, what would you say the time frame is in regards to having those completed? Or
wow, well, some of these are so complex, and I don't know what the puzzle count is, or the piece count is, but some of these take well over 8 days,
Wow.
to do, and maybe 10 days, and that's with 2, 3, 4 people working on them. And again, because they're very complex, and so I would say puzzle. I would say that stands out right now as something that we focus on.
But that's a nice family event though too.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's therapeutic. It's bonding. And there's a sense of accomplishment when we're done. Of course, waking up sometimes in the morning, and because we have a couple of cats, and one of the cats thought it was a good idea to chew a puzzle piece and to knock it off the table, and then we had to find it, and that's always happy to find. And then my wife's having to do surgery on a piece of cardboard and then paint the piece so that it looks like the actual piece that he destroyed. So that's kind of funny that when that happens.
Kind of substituting and make sure you can get by with that. But yeah. No, our cats like to eat paper too. It's amazing. So I understand that. No, that's really cool though. It's funny you bring up about the model building. One of the things I really used, I wasn't very good at it. I would try to make my model eagles. I would try to, the ships from Star Trek, and I would always want them to come to look like what was on the screen from television, and I couldn't do it. I did not have the eye or the talent for it. And what started to happen was, in the recent years, obtaining pre-built models, and it wasn't really like cheating to have them. It was just because I could not get them to the level of detail that, making a model would be. And these models that I would get, like back in the day when we were growing up, I remember the AMT models for Star Trek. You had the MPC models for Space 1999. In fact, speaking of which, for the folks out there, I know Charlene's a huge Space 1999 fan, just so you know. But this was something that came out like back in like 1975, and I remember getting this when I got it, Jack, the local 2 guys that was in Garfield.
Oh yeah,
and it wasn't this one specific, but I remember, going there with my parents and getting that. And I think it was like $1.99. And again, it's 1975. But trying to put it together and like using, the glue. But in regards to painting it and trying to get it to be, the way it was, it just I couldn't get it to that level. But it was nice that to be able to do that and to try to go through the process anyway, though.
Oh yeah, there's something about model building, or just finding the right model, that is very, very appealing, And I still have a model of a Pontiac Trans Am that's in the box that I bought probably in 1980, that I never put together.
Really? Wow.
But I have it, and it's in my closet on a shelf. And for some reason, it's like I have a mental block on it. I don't know why, but I still have it, and it has all the pieces. The box is in great condition, but I never built it.
But what? It's like in its own way, though. It's a special collectible because you have that method of getting it, and it's almost like
right.
Probably don't want to put it together at this point.
No.
just because, yeah, no, I totally understand. Bill commented too. He said, "Fitness and health are self-interest, hobby, passion, and yes, therapeutic and wholeness." So
Yeah.
very true. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the shout outs real quick and just kind of start to wind down. So,
Sure.
folks, if you have any last minute comments that you'd like to share, please put them into the comments section. And I'm just going to go through these quickly, and then we'll come back to, our discussion. But I want to give a shout out to Mike and Mary Beth of Sci-Fi Distilled. Mike and Mary Beth are friends that are on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they will be back this Wednesday, which is going to be the 13th, and they will be covering the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. This came out in 2022. They just did the Star Wars holiday special, and we actually covered this. Ross and I actually covered this on the show about 3 years ago. And I have a feeling the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special is probably much better than the Star Wars Thanksgiving Day special. Because for the folks that have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And I think Mike and Mary Beth would agree with that too. So definitely check them out on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Also, I want to give a shout out to my friend Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey is the producer that is actually right now in production with the documentary The Eagle Has Landed. We were just talking about the Space 1999 Eagle. He's in Denmark right now, and he is, I'm going to put some photos up just so everybody can see it. And he is with Jan right now, and Jan is actually the creator of this. This thing is amazing. It is incredibly large. I do not know the specific dimensions of this, but he has done an incredible job. And again, it's Jan Wenberg, and you can definitely check out for the information on the Eagle and what the progression of everything. This is just a couple of slides. As you can see, Jeffrey and Jan are actually sitting on top of it. That just shows you how big it is. It is incredible what he has created with this. And there's going to be a very special interview that will be in the Eagle documentary, which is entitled The Eagle Has Landed. For information in regards to the documentary, you can go to www.eagledocumentary.com. Again, it is in process of being filmed and will be released later in 2024. Also, speaking of Space 1999, just want to remind folks that if you are a fan of the series, there will be a convention in the UK. And for information regarding the convention, you can go to the website, which is www.space199950years.com. Space 1999, actually, I did a special episode this past Sunday. We had some folks from the series that were on with us. And you can always go back to check it out. But Space 1999 went into production 50 years ago on December 3rd. It was released in 1975, and the 50th anniversary is going to be celebrated in London, England next year. So again, if you're interested, definitely go to the website to check that out at www.space199950years.com. Also, just talking about Country Gate. Country Gate players, if you are in the New Jersey area, and if specifically if you're close to Belvedere, New Jersey, and you want to check it out, Country Gate opened tonight for the last show of the season. It's A Wonderful Life, a live radio play. So that is going on right now as we're speaking. It's going to also be taking place tomorrow as well, and also next weekend, running until the 17th. So for information about the show, you can visit the website. It's www.countrygate.org. The theater is run by my friend Bill Scorado, and Bill also posts information on his website, which is www.billscorado.com. So please check that out as well. And also I want to give a shout out to Captain Phil from Captain Phil's Planet, WUSB 90.1 FM, Stony Brook, New York. The captain's schedule is on Friday nights between 9 and 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I believe Phil was taking a break this week, but he will be back next week. So again, for his schedule and information, just go to the website and look up WUSB 90.1 FM, Stony Brook, New York. Also, want to give a shout out to my friend John Risco's girlfriend Martha, who owns Studio One Thrift. Again, congratulations to Martha. She has opened up a physical location, and the store actually, if she has a new website, you can go to www.studioonethrift.net. This is a new website address, and she has actually had the internet store in existence for over the last year. The physical location just opened a couple months ago, and you can visit the information on the website. She offers quality, stylish, affordable clothing for both men and women, and you can also receive styling tips and informational updates. And it is available all year long. Again, just visit the website, make sure that you register. Also, I want to give a shout out to my friend and co-host Ross Amico. Ross actually has two shows that are on, and they're on both Friday nights and Saturday nights. Friday night is Picture Perfect, which is on at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and The Lost Chord, which is on Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can also visit his page under Classic Ross Amico, which is on Facebook for updates. He also does blogs as well. Now, in regards to his show, it is actually at a new location, which is at KWAX. So what you want to do is you want to go to kwax.uoregon.edu. And there you can actually listen to the broadcasts. Again, Ross does have informational updates and posts, which will give you information about the shows and what he is covering. And then lastly, Ross and I will be returning next Friday, which is going to be December 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be covering the 1962 film, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. This movie actually has a really pretty impressive cast. And also it's a very appropriate story for this season. So we hope you will join us. And again, that will be next Friday, December 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thanks, Jack. Just wanted to do that. Just checking to see, folks, if you have any last minute comments, please do post. Jack, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. The time went incredibly quick, and just want to check with you as far as any last minute comments. And I'm hoping that you definitely had a good time and enjoyed our discussion as well.
I did, and it feels like just a conversation between two friends, which is really what it is. And it was great catching up with you. And again, I hope I've presented enough interesting content where people actually enjoyed tuning in tonight. So thank you so much for those of you that are still out there. I appreciate it. And Roy, it was really nice catching up, and we'll continue our conversations, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely. Just I'm going to sign off with everybody, but don't go away. And just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for joining us, and really appreciate everybody being out there. And Chris' last comment is, I like to call it Buddy Jack a Dragon Slayer. I'm not sure what he's referring to, though. Oh, and Chris was talking about in regards to John Saxon working with Bruce Lee in a movie back in 1973.
That's right. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone, just want to wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend. And as I always like to say, live long and prosper. And we'll see you next time. And thanks for tuning in.